When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be talking about Illyrio in the Winds of Winter. Again, thank you for everyone that participated, giving questions as it focuses these videos. If you do want to participate in any of these videos, especially Winds of Winter stuff, make sure you're following the Instagram or the Discord as I post the Q&A stuff, so you guys can get your questions in on those, as well as in the YouTube community section of this channel. So check those if you ever want to ask a question on of any of the characters that we're doing. But this week's Illyrio is pretty straightforward, right? The character of Illyrio is not seen much on the page. We hear a bit about him. We get him at certain points of the story, like the very beginning of a Game of Thrones, very beginning of a Dance with Dragons. But outside of that, we don't get a ton of the character. And so a lot of the questions that I have this week are mainly on kind of the background of the character or things he's been doing in the background that we just don't have the answers to yet. And so we're going to kind of like infer onto what those things are and some of Illyrio's motivations. But before we get more into Illyrio, thank you for all my Patreons and members that support this channel. If you did want to become one, you get videos early, and I will be doing some exclusive content moving forward. But let's get into Illyrio Mopatis and kind of unraveling the character. The first question I wanted to look at, because we're going to be doing a lot of stuff in terms of the Blackfyres, because it is very relevant to the character of Illyrio. It's kind of been theorized that he could either be a Blackfyre, or maybe his wife was a Blackfyre, and young Griff himself could also be a Blackfyre. So there's a lot of things surrounding the idea of the Blackfyre. So first question I want to go with is, does Illyrio know that young Griff may not be Rhaegar's son? So I think the thing here is going to be, that's an interesting one, because we have to look at how much do Varys and Illyrio trust each other. And you'd have to think quite a lot, right? Given the fact that Illyrio and Varys seem to be in league together. Arya's, I believe, second chapter in A Game of Thrones really seems to back that up. They're even meeting in King's Landing to discuss their plans. I would assume whatever Varys did, if he did baby swap Aegon, Varys would then tell that to Illyrio. Or if Illyrio, young Griff is just his son and they're basically charading him as Aegon, Illyrio is obviously going to know as well. So I think any situation in which the parentage of young Griff is not who it's said to be, I think Illyrio already knows that. But it brings up an interesting question, because we're going to have something else that we're going to look at with the relationship of Varys and Illyrio. But as of right now, I don't think anything has been suggested to really say that the two are not really completely in league in terms of young Griff and all that storyline going on right now. But let's continue on. So Wheezy, kind of going off the back of that idea, asked on Discord, are he and Varys still on the same team? And I would believe so, given the fact that Illyrio seems to be almost completely backing young Griff. Think about the differences in the way Illyrio treats young Griff compared to Daenerys. Whereas Daenerys and Viserys, he kind of was using them. They very much seemed more like pawns. But that doesn't seem the case for young Griff at all, right? Young Griff seems to be more of a nurtured product. He's been given way more things than Daenerys and Viserys were. Think about everything that Aegon has gotten, right? Daenerys only got things because she was sold to the Dothraki. Illyrio wasn't really giving her anything. He was using her as a bargaining chip with Viserys for the most part, using them to invade Westeros, whatnot. That was not the case with young Griff whatsoever. And so I think when you think about the two, Varys' actions indicate he is going for young Griff. The way he kills Kevin Lannister, the way he monologues about that, it seems to indicate he is on the young Griff team. Now, you also have to remember the plan that Illyrio and Varys had at that point was for young Griff to marry Daenerys. And so, again, I definitely think, given what has all transpired, again, young Griff is in Westeros right now. He's much more closer proximity to Varys and all that. I think they're still on the same team. Now, could that change? It's possible, especially given the fact that I think of the two, Varys or Illyrio, I think Illyrio is actually related to young Griff, right? I think his wife was a Blackfyre, and so that makes young Griff a Blackfyre. And so I think personally, to me, Varys would be the one I could see actually switching up. I think Varys can maybe realize if Daenerys came over that Daenerys is the one that is by far the more powerful of the two and maybe switch sides at the last second. That's possible. I could also see a situation in which Varys continues to stay on Young Griff's side with Illyrio because Young Griff is kind of the prototype king that I think Varys would want, right? Someone that's been trained for rulership and all these things. Think about his speech to Kevin, right? That's something that Daenerys has not been, right? And Daenerys has also shown tendencies that from the outlook, Varys would not like. So I think for right now and going forward, there is a good possibility they will stay on the same team and go down probably together. Andrew asked another interesting question, given the fact that like we were just talking about this idea of, you know, Illyrio being a Blackfyre. The question that we still are left with, because we just don't know where the sword Blackfyre is, a symbol of the Blackfyre power, but also the Targaryen power. Where is it, right? So let me give the exact question. If Illyrio gave young Griff Blackfyre, how did he come into possession of it? Could his wife Sarah have inherited it if she was from the female line of the Blackfyres? Yes, I think that's exactly how it happened, right? There's, I guess, 2 or 3 different ways it could have possibly gone down, but I think there's really one way that makes the most sense, given how it would come back into the story, and given how secret it's been. But let's think about this. I made a whole video on this exact idea on the whereabouts of Blackfyre and Dark Sister, so if you did want to check that out, I have actually made a video on this exact topic, but I'll just broadly go over where the whereabouts were. So Blackfyre, the last time we see it was with Aegon Rivers and the Disputed Lands. We don't know what happened to it afterwards. We don't know if he gave it to the Golden Company, but that doesn't seem likely given it's not seen. And neither does it make an appearance in the War of the Nine Penny Kings, either with Meleys. Because given that time period, we know that Meleys does not have it. It's not said by anything, it's by anyone, it's not accounted for in the histories, which would indicate it probably was not in their possession. If it was, the Targaryens would have wanted it. They were still on the throne, that would have been a huge, valuable piece. We also know that if he had it in the Golden Company or somebody else had recovered it, it's not known, and nobody in the Golden Company seems to wield it unless they're holding it secretly. We also know Daemon, who actually ended up fighting Meleys for control. Well, I guess it's the other way around. Meleys ended up fighting Daemon for control of the Golden Company. It also doesn't seem to appear that he had it either. So if we're going off of just logically, the logical implication of that is Blackfyre did not pass through the Golden Company. But it also didn't really travel down some of the male heirs either, which would indicate to me that it went to Aegon. He gave the sword to the female line, or it has just been lost to history type thing. So if we're going to see Blackfyre again, it's going to come from probably Illyrio, because maybe his wife had the sword and now it's in Illyrio's possession. Now we don't know yet because Blackfyre has not made an appearance yet, right? The one thing I would question with this idea of Illyrio having Blackfyre, why hasn't he given it to young Griff yet? This was young Griff's crowning moment, right? He reveals himself to the Golden Company. You would have thought if you're going to marry off Daenerys and young Griff, you would want young Griff to have the ancestral sword of the Targaryens. But he doesn't. So is Illyrio saving giving Blackfyre to him until he gets crowned? Or does he just simply not have it? That's an interesting point, right? There's so many questions I have with the Sword of Blackfyre. I would really hate to see that it's just completely out of the story, that it was just lost in the Undisputed Lands, or some random person has it because they found it on a battlefield, they don't know its value or something like that. Like, logically, you would hope to see it back in the story. I think we're going to see Dark Sister back in the story almost for a certainty, but Blackfyre is still kind of up there in the air at this time. We just don't have a lot of information on its whereabouts, but a great question from you, Andrew. So going back to some Discord questions, Dakota asks, was his goal to get Fagon and Dany to marry, giving legitimacy to Fagon's claim? Did he stop supporting Fagon after the news after Dragons reaches Pentos, or is he playing both sides so he can't be on the losing side? Yeah, Illyrio's in a very tough position because all of his plans have kind of backfired, in my opinion, right? Because marrying Fagon let me stop saying Fagon. But marrying Aegon to Daenerys was a very good move in terms of it linked him with the dragons, the power of Daenerys, the Unsullied, matching that with the Golden Company. They would have easily rolled the Seven Kingdoms, and Young Griff, I think, is already going to do that. You also have dragons for Daenerys as well. So yes, part of it is it gives him a lot of legitimacy, right? Given the fact that he would be with the dragons, marrying a Targaryen, it would help his claim a ton, right? If people were doubting if this was the real Aegon, marrying him to Daenerys would surely help. But with that being said, did he really need legitimacy of Daenerys? I don't think it was all about that. I think that was an added perk. I think it was really just Daenerys controlled a lot of power. It made sense to unite the Targaryen claims, or at least the dragon claims, the Blackfyre and the Targaryens. It made a lot of sense to do so. And so the problem then becomes when Young Griff doesn't do that, okay? And he goes to Westeros. Well, the real problem for Illyrio now is going to be, well, he's closer to, unfortunately, Daenerys than he is to Young Griff. And when Daenerys starts coming to Westeros, I think undoubtedly she will stop at Pentos. It makes a lot of sense. Pentos is very close in terms of getting to Westeros. Makes a lot of sense to me. But I think regardless, this is another question we have later on, so I won't go too far into it because I want to talk about it then, but I do think we'll see a conversation in terms of Daenerys and Illyrio, whether that's like we're actually seeing it in that chapter at Pentos, or it's going to be like a flashback type thing where it happens, but it's not exactly like, we're not exactly in Pentos. It's Daenerys recounting, visiting Pentos, maybe on her journey to going back to Westeros. Now, I will say, it's going to be a tough position Illyrio's in. I think Illyrio will try to play both sides. But the issue he's going to run into is going to be, how do you rationalize to Daenerys that you had a secret Targaryen this whole time and you didn't tell Viserys or Dany? Now, maybe his reasoning is going to be, okay, well, he didn't want Viserys to know because Viserys would maybe kill Aegon, viewing him as a threat. That's a good explanation, in my opinion, the best he could probably come up with. But then the other issue would be, okay, well, why was he treating Aegon so much better than he was treating Viserys and Dany? There's a lot of things there that are going to be interesting. Now, the problem also is going to be if you are Daenerys, right? You think Daenerys might see through Illyrio. That's not truly the case from what we know, because Dany trusts Illyrio quite a lot, right? We hear that in her POVs, that Illyrio is a friend of hers, which is kind of ironic, given that Illyrio allowed Dany to be sold into slavery. She doesn't really think about those things. Now, another wild card we have in this scenario is Tyrion. Tyrion is going to know exactly the person Illyrio is, as well as Illyrio's planning. Now, we know that Illyrio wanted Young Griff to marry Daenerys. So maybe that's going to help his cause, because in reality, what Illyrio was trying to do would have benefited Daenerys. He would have brought the Golden Company to her. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for Illyrio to play both sides. We're just going to have to see how George writes it. It's going to be a really interesting dialogue between the characters of Barristan, Daenerys, Tyrion, and Illyrio when we get that moment in the story. Kitty Kit asks, do you think he's Young Griff's real father? If so, will he admit it to Dany if she confronts him? Is there a chance that he'll have a falling out with Varys? I can't really read him well, but despite their similar causes putting Young Griff on the throne, their decision-making process when Young Griff is involved seems very different. Yeah, and I think part of the issue is Young Griff and the Blackfyres as a whole were not really an idea George had during book 1. We know that for a fact, right? The Blackfyres were not made up at this time. Maybe George had some inkling of what he wanted to do with that, given that he'd brought up the stuff with Aegon IV and Aemon, the Dragon Knight, on the parentage of Daeron. So there was kind of some things there, but he didn't have that history out there yet. We didn't know about the Blackfyre rebellions until I believe the 3rd book. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I can remember, I think it's the 3rd book when they're first actually like name dropped. And so the problem becomes the things that happened in book 1. It's difficult to put all those pieces together because we didn't know Young Griff existed yet, or George himself probably didn't know that that plot was going to happen yet. And so that's kind of why I think some of the decision-making is kind of hard to read. Illyrio as a character is kind of hard to read because there's some conflicting stuff there going on, right? But let's look at the idea of, do you think he's young Griff's real father? I think so. I think it makes a lot of sense for young Griff and Sarah to be a Blackfyre, to then give some reason as to why Illyrio gives so much more to young Griff. And it definitely adds to this idea that you're going to do more for someone you care about. That's your own blood, right? That makes a lot of sense as to why young Griff has kind of gotten this really great treatment, this privileged treatment that like Daenerys has not gotten. And so I think there's only like one or two scenarios in which I think it makes sense. I think Illyrio either is the father of young Griff, or Sarah, this was maybe just her child. Young Griff was her child, and just Illyrio loved her so much that he's doing this for her. Maybe it's Varys' child. I would like to think, though, that the most likely option is Illyrio is young Griff's father. Now, will he admit that to Daenerys if she confronts him? No. There is no chance that I think Illyrio would reveal something like that to him. Especially when Tyrion buys that this is actually Aegon Targaryen, right? There's no reason for Illyrio to tell her that. Illyrio should go along that this is this lie, right? She should go along with, or he should go along with this idea that, yeah, Aegon was saved from King's Landing and all of that. It makes the most sense to do so, because if he tells her that he's a Blackfyre, that's not a good look. The two don't have a good history, and also you have young Griff parading around as a Targaryen. It's not a good look. So I don't think there is a chance in hell that Illyrio should tell her that. Now, if she comes out and she thinks that's the case, if she thinks he's a Blackfyre right off the bat, pushing him and maybe threatening to kill him, then maybe. I just don't see that as the way that interaction is going to go down, especially given the fact that Tyrion believes young Griff is a Targaryen. Is there a chance that I'll have a falling out with Varys? Again, I talked about this earlier, so I won't go too far in depth, but yeah, it's very possible. Given that Daenerys is going to be the more powerful between young Griff and Daenerys, I think it's very possible that Varys will have to choose his side, and maybe he goes with Daenerys, given that's his best chance for power and to not die. And so that gets us to a really awesome question that I have from Jim, because I think this is one of the hardest parts of understanding how we're going to get more of Illyrio, right? Like, Jim states that, do we actually see him? I got a feeling we will only hear about him. And I think that's very logical, right? The way that could be done, and the way that this could actually be done, is we're seeing letters. You know, Illyrio sending letters to Jon Con. People just simply getting information from Illyrio. Maybe in terms of Dany, maybe she's going to these places. We don't have time to give a POV of just in Pentos, so what do? So maybe instead of going to Pentos and having an entire chapter in Pentos, it's a journeying chapter. So maybe she comes from Volantis and she's going to Dragonstone. And that chapter is, yeah, there's stuff happening on this journey, this boat travel, but we also get a flashback to, Pentos, right? Where she stops off in Pentos and she just remembers this conversation she had with Illyrio and all these things that went down. We see this quite a lot with Daenerys, especially in the first book, where things happen off screen, but then Daenerys then remembers those things, and that's how we're kind of reintroduced to those ideas. That's kind of what we see a lot of the times with Daenerys in the first book. So yeah, George could definitely do that, and we'll kind of really only see him through like a flashback or through other people's information that's going on. That's very possible. I'd love to see more of Illyrio because I think he's a fascinating character, which would be unfortunate if we didn't see him at all, but yeah, I personally think I'd like to see it. Bill Joe actually has a couple questions. One, do I think he's a Blackfyre? I do. I think it's a lot closer than maybe a lot of people in the community think. I've made videos on kind of defending both theories because I think both theories are good, right? I don't have any problems with anybody that thinks he's a Targaryen. I have no problems with anybody that thinks he's a Blackfyre. I personally lean to him being a Blackfyre, given the fact that George ramped up his Blackfyre lore and history right after young Griff was kind of introduced. Like right during that time period where he was crafting up the character of young Griff, probably around like the Storm of Swords, Feast for Crows time. I personally think it makes a lot of sense given the information we know, this Mummer's Dragon prophecy that's given to Daenerys, a lot of the connections that doesn't seem to make sense with Illyrio and young Griff, the way that we're constantly told the male line of the Blackfyres ended, but the female line did not. And so I personally think it makes a lot of sense to introduce a young Griff. type character, because then you can have kind of the resolution of a Blackfyre arc, as well as doing a Dance of the Dragons a second time type thing, like George has kind of maybe suggested. I really like the idea of him being a Blackfyre. How large a role will he play in the rest of the story? That's a tough one to answer, because in a lot of ways, Illyrio's mission is done. He set up young Griff to be a leader, a figurehead of the Targaryen / Blackfyre house. He has kind of supported him and all of that. But what things we could see is maybe information he tells Daenerys, the way he could be some sort of figure in terms of backing or not backing young Griff. I think a lot of that could be great, his connection to the Blackfyre history at this time, but I don't think he's going to be the most significant one. I think that's going to be Varys in their partnership. Could he have any role in brokering a marriage between Aegon and Daenerys? Of course, right? He's going to know both of them from not their childhood exactly, because Daenerys, yeah, she was a child when she married Drogo, but she was kind of coming more into, I guess, her teen years in this world, I guess, because this world you age up much quicker. But I would say, yeah, I think it's very possible. If there's another way we see Illyrio is that he comes over with Daenerys. He comes from Pentos to Dragonstone, brokering the two to have some sort of marriage. Now, I don't think that marriage is going to happen, but I think Illyrio could be someone that could be used in that way, as well as Illyrio could be something that could be a spy for Varys. That could be interesting as well. Will he journey to King's Landing like he wanted to? I think it's very possible. Like I just talked about, I think if he does, it's going to be one of two ways. One of two things is going to happen. One, it's because he's going to come over with Daenerys. He's going to lend all of his support to Daenerys when she comes to Pentos, and that's how one part of it could happen. The second part is young Griff takes King's Landing and he comes to see his son on the throne. That's the other way. If he goes to King's Landing to join Aegon's small council, what position would be held and how effective would he be? I think he'd be the master of coin, for one, and I think he would actually be pretty good at it. The problem he would face is something that Jaehaerys actually found in his reign as well, is the problem with having someone from Essos come and be the master of coin. People do not like people from Essos. It's just blatantly what we've seen. It's kind of a racist thing towards the Essos being a lower people than themselves or all that stuff. And I think Illyrio would understand economics quite well, that he would be very good at Master of Coin. I just don't think that young Griff would hold the castle long enough to actually have it matter. But yeah. Aegon, we were talking about him earlier with Blackfyre. I'd love to know where he put it. But he asked a question, what do you think his last moments will be like? Do you think we will get more hints about his lady love? Do you think he will help get Blackfyre? And do you think he will get more interactions with his best bro and favorite kid before it's all over? Okay, so I think there's a lot to unpack there. So first of all, what will his last moments be like? It really depends at what point he dies. If he dies when young Griff is on the throne, I think it's going to be a very bittersweet ending to the character, because yes, he saw his son on the throne, right? It's been his life goal, what he's been trying to achieve, since his wife and him probably had a child. So it'd be a very bittersweet ending. It'd be very similar to Catelyn, where it's like you see your son die. It's a terrible thing, but at the same time, you almost feel like you accomplished your goal. It just didn't go completely correctly, right? Because if he had married Daenerys, things would have gone completely different. Very similar if Robb had married someone else than he actually does, right? So I think that could be something that we see with the character. Now, will we get more hints about his lady love? I think so. If we see more of the character in Pentos with an interaction with Daenerys or Tyrion, we definitely will. I personally really would love to see the interactions we could get between Tyrion and Illyrio, because when we saw them in A Dance of Dragons, Tyrion was a lot more broken down. He's still a broken down character, but I think by the time we see him maybe interact with Illyrio a second time, could be a bit more of a changed character, but also he will have noticed what was going on, right? That Illyrio had this entire Lost Lord plot with the Blackfyres. Now he's not gonna think they're Blackfyres, but with this Prince Aegon, I would love to see Tyrion and Illyrio have one more conversation in Pentos. Do you think he will help get Blackfyre? Yeah, I'd like to think so, right? Because you have to think about, for the last, few years that young Griff is being trained, you have to think one huge thing on his mind would be getting the lost Targaryen / Blackfyre sword in Blackfyre. Now, where is that going to be? Does he have it in his possession? Is it somewhere in the Blackfyre line in terms of the female line? Is it just some random rich guy has the sword but doesn't understand its value and he maybe could buy it off someone? All that's definitely possible, and I'd love to see him get it. Do you think he will get more interactions with his best bro and favorite kid before it's all over? Yeah, I think we're going to see maybe one more. I'd like to see one more with the two characters to kind of resolve that plot, and I really think if we're going to see it, again, like I've talked about, there's two ways. One, it'll happen at King's Landing. The other one, it would happen when Daenerys and young Griff finally meet. I think that is the other way. So I do think I'd like to see that, but we'll see. When do you think Daenerys is going to kill him, or how is he going to die if he dies? If he dies, it will be by Daenerys, in my opinion. I think it's going to be a couple ways. One, it could be because Daenerys realizes that he's been playing her for a fool. Whether that's in Pentos, whether that's in Westeros, at some point Daenerys is going to realize, yeah, this young Criff kid is a Blackfyre. You've been playing me for a fool this entire time. And that's when it happens. So something similar that we could probably see would be like with Varys, how he dies in season 8. That could be something we could see with Illyrio. That could be another thing that just tips Daenerys over the edge. Someone she thought was a friend in Illyrio was actually not her friend at all. He was definitely playing her as a fool. And so that could be a really important and impactful way that he could go out. I think another way he dies could just be if he's Master of Coin, if he's in King's Landing with young Griff. He's going to stay with young Griff till the end, and that could be his death, an undoing. So I think that is a great way that we could see Illyrio going out. But that is all of the questions that I had for today. Thank you guys for everyone that submitted questions. I really love talking about the Blackfyres, especially the young Griff plot in A Winds of Winter. I think you guys know it's probably my favorite plot. It's not probably, it is my favorite plot. Really looking forward to Aegon and Jon Con's POVs. I am even looking forward to Daenerys more than I think I thought I would, just based upon what's going to have to be tackled from the actual character of Daenerys. I think one thing that I think Daenerys has lacked in terms of character growth compared to other characters, and she hasn't moved a ton, right, in terms of her character as much as other characters. Part of that is because she has such a strong character arc in book 1 that it does like make it really hard to keep developing that character. And I think Dance with Dragons was a book that specifically was trying to focus on her as a character and her psychology to really set up this next book. But thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.